Hello Minty fans and happy Halloween. Today, as part of the Mint Theatre Society's Halloween event, I would like to read you a short story that I've written myself. It's a short story that's set right here where I am sitting now, in the Peak District National Park. If you're anything like me, you love the outdoors. I certainly do. I like to be out, I like to watch the animals, I like to see the scenery and the weather. But when I'm in a landscape like this one, a landscape so obviously ancient, I can't help but wonder, what have these rocks seen? Human existence must be like the blink of an eye to the dark caves and high crags that are all around me right now. What other kinds of beings and spirits have called these lands home over the years? Well, perhaps it was just one of these beings or spirits that Rupert the park ranger came upon on that fateful, rainy afternoon that I'm about to tell you about. I'll let you be the judge of that. Happy Halloween!
It was a dreadful day. The windscreen wiper blades thunked in a steady rhythm, accompanied by the mechanical churring of the arms as they danced back and forth. Rain gathered on the glass, obscured the view of the narrow track ahead, and was sliced away again every couple of seconds. It was dirty weather that afternoon, as Rupert might have said, had there been anyone next to him in the passenger seat of the battered ranger's jeep. Rupert had drawn a very short straw indeed. A well-meaning rambling party had called earlier that day to say that the previous night's storm had felled a tree. They think it could be an ash, no, elm, in Grendel Wood. It had entirely blocked the footpath, they said. Rupert had agreed to drive up there and take some photographs. When he had agreed, it was morning, a mere 7 hours ago, when, peering out of the window at a troubled, rain-washed sky over his hot coffee, he had cheerfully surmised that it'll clear up. It did not clear up. Rupert left it until there was no leaving it. Then, with a heavy coat and heavy heart, he got into his jeep and began the winding, mud-splashed drive through the farm tracks up to Grendel Wood. Around him, the valley and the hills of the central peaks undulated in the grey, misty downpour. The earth was rounded by long-since departed glaciers, rendered into a soft blanket of rolling hills. Still, where these hills broke apart, or rocks still remained, the innards were revealed to be sharp, jagged, and in places almost crystalline in form. The deep valleys and ravines were scattered with boulders, and the rolling hills were riddled with holes, deep, winding caves of unfathomable depth and length. So it was on that darkening afternoon that Rupert's jeep turned right into the small gravelly car park, marked with a familiar National Trust sign that simply declared Grendel Wood. He parked and stepped out of the jeep into the deafening noise of the rain on the hood of his coat. Rupert was an experienced ranger, but he found that made his job all the harder. Experienced rangers like Rupert loved the wind, water and rock of the peaks no less than they did on their first day. Experienced rangers, however, had middle-aged middles to carry up steep paths, unacknowledged bad backs, and unmentioned plantar fasciitis. It was not far, but it was steep, and Rupert could not suppress a groan as he pocketed the small waterproof camera and headed through the small gate to climb the winding footpath through Grendel Wood. The wood, along with Grendel village below, was so named after a subterranean stream that flowed beneath the whole area. It honeycombed the ground, carving immense caverns and narrow passages before bursting out just above the village below in an explosion of water and rounded, worn pebbles that had once been the jagged innards of the hill. Grendel, Rupert had been told, was the old name of that stream, which ground the very earth itself in its insubstantial teeth. It pulsed and roared silently, somewhere below Rupert's boots, where no human had ever trodden. Rupert squelched up the path, looking at his feet, glancing up occasionally to see his way through the trees. The wet bark was almost black from a day of continuous rain, and the muted green moss smelled both fresh and dank at the same time. He had been walking for around 10 minutes when he saw it. He rounded the bend to see a vast trunk cutting across the path. A chunk of canopy, torn from the sky, lay like a fallen cloud, an explosion of green leaves and snapped twigs. The smell of sap, torn wood fibres and fresh earth was still potent in the air. It had been a mighty thing when it stood, largely unnoticed by passers-by. Now that it had crashed into the ground, its magnitude could not be missed. Even on its side, some of the branches stretched up 15 feet into the air. More terrible than the felled branches and trunk, however, were the roots. They had ripped up a section of earth with them, so that the tree still stood, perversely, in its own upended chunk of the ground. As Rupert walked around the base of the tree, he could see several snake-like arteries, some as thick as the boughs, snapped and broken. Water had begun to pool in the deep recess the tree had left behind. Rupert stood for a moment, awed by the sight of it. For some reason, he suddenly felt strange. There was something about the hole, like a great gouge in the flesh of the land, that was very slightly nauseating. Still, there was nothing unfamiliar about the task ahead of him, and he shook it off. He took out his camera and began to take pictures. "This is going to take a while," he muttered. "Need a tree surgeon." He sidestepped a broken root, and he stopped. On the other side of the tree, facing down the hill perpendicular to the path, was a figure. Whether it was male or female, Rupert could not tell, but it was slight and swaddled in a waterproof coat with the hood drawn tight about its face. The face itself was shaded by a peak on the front of the hood. The arms were held rather stiffly by its sides, and it seemed the person had been completely still for a while, unaware of Rupert's presence. Rupert imagined the figure was a hiker who had been descending the path only to be cut off by the fallen tree. What a hiker would be doing out in this weather did not cross his mind. After all, he had seen hikers do far more stupid things in his time. "How do?" Rupert called. The hiker turned his head, but Rupert still could make out very little in the rain. "Are you stuck there?" he pressed. The figure bowed lower to the wind and stumbled lamely forward, injured perhaps, a victim of the mud, or even just poorly chosen footwear. Rupert sighed. "Want some help down the hill?" The figure shambled closer to the fallen tree and regarded Rupert over the top of it. Rupert took a single step closer and bent down a little. Out from beneath the hood appeared the pinched face of a small, slight, elderly man. His skin was mottled grey, and he appeared to be in his late 60s, but his looks may well have been the result of a hard life rather than a long one. His hood was drawn up around his face, and his eyes squinted, almost closed in the rain, so that they appeared only as shaded slits in his grey face. "How do?" the old man repeated clearly. His next words were slurred, mumbled. "Need to get to Grendel." The old man's accent was not discernibly foreign in any way that Rupert could put his finger on, yet the way he spoke was slightly stilted and unnatural, like the tongue of one unused to English. He decided that this was no hiker. This man looked more like a lost vagrant. He had the weathered, stony look of the homeless. No sooner had this thought crossed Rupert's mind than the man surprised him by flashing a smile of slightly over-large, even, white teeth. "How long have you been out here, mate?" Rupert asked. The old man's jaw moved, but no words came. He seemed to shiver, and then he said, I need to get to Grendel. Rupert was perhaps a little unnerved, but he was not a man to let another stand out in the harsh weather of the peaks for want of a lift. The man was infirm, and by the look of his clothes he had been out in the rain for a long while. His waterproof was stained with something dark, and mud splattered almost every inch of him. Rupert's mind, still searching for an explanation, settled on possible dementia. "I'm going back to Grendel," he said. "The jeep's down the hill a little way. I'll take you, yeah?" The old man nodded mutely and smiled a little wider. "Are you all right? Did you twist your ankle or anything?" The old man looked straight down at his feet, invisible to Rupert, on the other side of the tree trunk. For a moment he contemplated them in silence, then he simply said, "No." Rupert raised one eyebrow. "All right," he muttered. "Well, hang on there a sec, and I'll help you get round here. You can get past the roots over there, then you can come with me down to the jeep." The old man did not reply, but began shambling towards the lower end of the fallen tree where the roots were, disappearing behind a shattered branch. "Hang on a sec," Rupert went on, feeling very stupid. "I'll be right there." Rupert took 2 more photographs of the damaged tree and blocked footpath as he circled back to the roots. He pocketed his camera and edged gingerly around the rim of the pit the tree had left behind, planning to stretch out his arm and guide the old man to safety. Nobody came. Rupert leaned still further to see and strained his ears, but still nothing. "You all right there?" he called. "Here, come this way." No response. Swearing under his breath, Rupert shuffled back to firm ground. He went back to the section of the trunk where he had first seen the old man and hoisted himself, middle-aged middle and all, to lean over the trunk. He looked left and right, but no one was there. "Hello? Where are you?" There was only rain hitting his hood and the rustling of the leaves of the fallen tree. Rupert slid down off the trunk, already thinking ahead. If he could not find the old man, he would have to call it in on his Jeep satellite phone as soon as possible. It would be dark in an hour and a half. If the sun dropped, it was a job for mountain rescue, for helicopters and heat-sensitive cameras. Those things were expensive. What Rupert really hoped was that someone else was nearby, someone who could help him in his search. With this in mind, he hastily snapped a final picture of the tree and trotted down the hill. "Found some old fella out here," he would say. "Seems totally out of it. I don't think he's walking properly either. He's got waterproofs on, but he looks like he's been out here for a while, lost or something. Dementia, I'd say. Definitely something wrong." Rupert watched his own feet as he descended the path swiftly. He looked up and saw his jeep through the trees. He looked down, and when he looked up again, his stomach tightened. There, next to the jeep, stock still and patiently facing the trail, was the old man. For some reason, the implausibility of that fact made Rupert want to sprint past, abandon the jeep and the old man and make for the road. His terror redoubled when, no sooner had this thought sprung unbidden into his mind, a second followed it. The thought that, if he did run, the old man might chase him. Fear threatened. Nevertheless, as Rupert approached, he swallowed these notions. As unsettling as it was, the old man was not to be feared. He was a vulnerable stranger who needed Rupert's help. He must have descended, uncanny as it seemed, by some overgrown shortcut through the trees. He must have. "How do?" Rupert said quizzically. "Where'd you get off to then?" The old man muttered something that ended with, "down the hill a little way." Rupert walked circuitously around the old man and the jeep to slide his key into the driver's side door. "How'd you beat me?" "I need to get to Grendel," the old man repeated, in precisely the same tone he had previously. Rupert inclined his head towards the back seat. "Door's open. Let's see if we can't get you home." The old man nodded appreciatively, still squinting in the rain, and shuffled to the back door of the jeep. He opened it with a jerking stiffness and slid into the seat. Rupert got in and angled his mirror so he could see his passenger. The old man seemed glad to be out of the cold, for he slumped immediately in the seat, the stiffness seeming to leave his body with an exhalation. At the same moment, Rupert was aware of a terrible, musty smell emanating from him. Certainly homeless, Rupert thought. "What brought you out in this, then?" Rupert asked. "Grendel," the old man said simply. "What's in Grendel? There's naught there but a few shops and pubs, you know." The old man flashed his alarming teeth again, gleaming under the shadow of his peaked hood. Rupert wondered afterwards why he had not noticed the man did not remove that hood. "A few shops and pubs," the old man said. "Good." Rupert frowned, but turned his attention back to the road as he gathered speed. "Do you know someone there?" "No." "Where are you coming from?" The old man's voice dropped to such a low pitch it sounded almost like it belonged to someone completely different, and he gurgled a single word in what sounded like some foreign language. The sound was so guttural, so wet and croaking, that Rupert perceived it at first as a cough or a choking sound, and it sent a chilly breath down between his shoulder blades. He did not know what to say, or even whether the man was laughing at his expense, for the teeth were still gleaming in the corner of his rear-view mirror. "A long time away," the old man added. Rupert nodded. "You got somewhere to stay?" "Always." The smell was becoming uncomfortable. Rupert cracked the window. "That all right?" "Yes," the old man said amiably. "Left here." Rupert frowned. Between the rolling sheets of water and the frantic wipers, he barely even saw the left turn coming up on a slight bend. As well as he knew the area, he did not even know where it went. It was nothing but a dirt farm track, winding off between hedges and thickets deeper into the hillside. "I don't think so, mate," he said. "You won't find any shops and pubs up there." The old man shifted slowly, leaning forward. "Left here," he repeated in precisely the same tone. "Mate, there's nowt there. Grendel's straight on." The old man lurched forward suddenly and pressed his face against the side of Rupert's headrest. Rupert flinched as the odour intensified and the teeth came within inches of his left ear. The old man's arm thrust out, pointing at the left turn with one bony grey finger. "Shit!" Rupert swore. He braked for lack of anything else to do, stopping sharply ahead of the left turn. "Left," the old man said evenly. "No!" Rupert said exasperatedly. "I'm not going that way. You said Grendel. Grendel is straight on," the old man said, flawlessly repeating Rupert's own words in the precise tone in which he had said them. Rupert turned to where the old man was curling back into his seat slowly. "Mate," he said, "are you all right?" "Yes, mate." "Listen, tell me where you need to get to. Do you have an address?" "I need to get to left." The first part of the sentence was spoken in the same way as the several times he had said, "I need to get to Grendel." The final word, however, was croaked in that wet, gurgling voice that seemed not to belong to the throat from which it bubbled. Rupert was barely breathing. "But left." "No," Rupert answered as decisively and unyieldingly as he ever had. He did not know why, but he would rather have stepped out into the rain and handed the stranger his keys than take the winding left turn between the grassy edges with those grinning teeth over his left shoulder. He noticed his heart was beating faster. "You better let me know where you're going, friend," he said firmly. "I don't want to kick you out in this rain, but I'm not going out of my way either. Now, you can tell me where you want to go, and I can take you. Or you can let me drive you to the police station in Grendel so they can get you where you need to go." The old man listened in motionless silence. Rupert abandoned the rear-view mirror and twisted in his seat, which was no mean feat with his middle-aged middle tugging against his seatbelt. The old man was perfectly still. He seemed not even to breathe. Rupert saw that his eyes which he had first taken to be squinting against the rain, were still all but closed. Another thrill of dread trembled in his core. "Hey," he said softly. "Can you hear me?" The old man did not move. Rupert was sure of that afterwards. The old man himself did not move, but something inside did. With a wet, sucking sound, the sunken cheeks quivered, and the lips of the face shifted. The teeth that Rupert had taken to be grinning appeared to push themselves forward, parting the lips in a slimy grimace. Then the mouth, and the mouth alone, moved to say in a low, gurgling voice, "I'm hungry." Rupert felt a horror that pierced through any incredulity he might have possessed at seeing such an uncanny thing. He whipped around, despite his middle, unclicked his seatbelt and threw the door open, shouldering it before he had even pulled the handle. He sprang out of the car into the fresh, rain-soaked air and realised what a smell he had been sitting in. He staggered backwards into the road, his wide eyes fixed through the raindrop-mottled glass on the dark figure still sitting in his back seat. The belligerent honk of a horn made him leap a second time. He stumbled backwards into the opposite verge as an oncoming car slowed just enough to swing around his open door, and not at the same time smear him against the pavement. The driver flashed his lights angrily. Rupert stood gasping. He blinked rain out of his eyes. The other driver was shouting something, lost on the wind. Rupert would not have heard him anyway, for at that moment the back door of his own abandoned car clicked open. Through the sheets of water, Rupert would later swear that the old man tipped out, slithering onto the tarmac as though a dead weight. Once on the ground, however, his arms and legs squirmed strangely to life, and he crawled with horrifying speed. Not towards Rupert, but around the car, into the verge, and around the bend of the left turn, rustling the wet grass as he went, like a hare disappearing into a field. Rupert opened his lungs and screamed. When Rupert had called the ranger's station on his satellite phone, he had sounded so distressed that two of his colleagues had immediately gone out to retrieve him and the jeep. He reported the old man, the rank smell, the strange voice, and the fallen tree. He could not bring himself to mention the teeth. The mountain rescue team went out with their helicopter, their heat-sensitive cameras, and their boots on the ground. They covered the whole area and found nothing, nobody. It was 2 days before Rupert could be convinced to leave the ranger station in Grendel and show the team the location of the left turn where he had last seen the old man. In the company of a fellow ranger and the mountain rescue coordinator, he made the drive up towards Grendel Wood in the back seat. It could not have been more different. The rain gone, the valley had transformed into a chocolate box bucolic scene, complete with sheep and fields full of buttercups. The sun touched the grass and the trees, which sparkled back with innumerable diamond droplets. The world smelled green again, and Grendel Wood actually appeared pleasant as they approached up the narrow track to the car park. "No doubt about it," the mountain rescue coordinator was saying as she sluiced around puddled bend after puddled bend. "The dogs would have picked him up if anything had happened to him out here. There's not a breath of wind. Perfect weather for the canines." "You think he walked down to Grendel?" Rupert's colleague, John, asked. "That'd be my guess," said the coordinator. "He was probably more capable than he looked to you in all that rain, eh, Rupert?" Rupert was not listening. "The turn's coming up," he muttered. As the car came easily around a bend, Rupert saw the turn now on his right. It was overgrown, disappearing into the long grass of a paddock and then snaking back up towards Grendel Wood. "There," Rupert said. "This one." The car pulled over slowly. There was a pause as all three of them looked at the track. "This goes nowhere," John said. "Worse than nowhere," the coordinator said. "It goes back uphill. You're sure this is where he went, Rupert?" Rupert looked out of the window and saw the long grass still wet. In his mind, he saw the limp, snake-like form of the old man crawling through it. He shuddered. "This is the one." Another pause. "Well," said the coordinator, "I guess we should go and have a look." The three of them got out of the car. The birds sang in the hedgerows and the sun was warm on Rupert's broad back as he followed John and the coordinator. The coordinator poked into every tussock and verge with her stick in a rather grim hope, Rupert thought, of finding the remains of the old man. It did not matter. She would not find anything. The path turned up the hill again, and the paddock through which it ran turned uneven, pitted with hollows and studded with great chunks of lichen-covered rock. Up ahead, the path seemed to lead back around and up to the edge of Grendel Wood. "I don't understand why he thought this was the way," John said innocently. "He didn't," Rupert muttered. "Why ask you to come here then?" "I don't know. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe, I don't know." John fell silent, glancing nervously at his friend and then at the back of the rather dogged coordinator, who was peering around the edge of a rocky outcropping. "Path doesn't go on much further," she said. "We're almost up in the trees." Rupert's boot splashed suddenly into sodden ground. At the same moment, John said, "Running water. We're lucky we didn't flood again with all that rain." Indeed, water was trickling down through the grass. Rupert shook off his boot and frowned. "The trees ought to have soaked up any runoff from the hill," he said. John shrugged. They trudged in silence for a while longer, all the while dodging rivulets and streams hidden by the long grass. It was only when they reached the edge of the wood that the coordinator stopped and called back, "Look here!" Rupert's heart began to pound. At once, he thought she must have found the old man, lying there in the long grass. This thought was accompanied by the horrendous image of him crawling, soaked and slithering through the grass around their feet. Then his mind said, no, he could not be alive. She must have discovered his body. As sickening as this second assumption was, it brought with it a strange relief, a tangible end to the tale, confirmation that the old man was no more than a confused and mentally ill transient who had succumbed to delirium in the storm. John began to jog, and mostly in order to remain close to other human beings, Rupert joined him. What the coordinator found was neither of those things. There, at the edge of the wood, was a great boulder. Underneath it, overhung by moss and hoary lichen, was a wide, grinning gap of unfathomable darkness, perhaps 2 feet wide, the water running out from it as though the ground itself was salivating. Without the rain, the water would not have been there, and without the water, the crevasse would have been almost invisible. The coordinator stooped down and clicked on her torch, shining it into the gap. She might as well have held a candle up to the night sky for all it revealed. "Would you look at that?" she said. "A swallow hole." "Yeah," agreed John. "The hills round here are full of them." "I wonder how deep it goes," the coordinator mused. "You know, that's how they found the old caverns up there at Winnet. 2 shepherds in the 19th century walking a field they'd been using for years, and oops, down one of them goes up to his waist in a swallow hole. The next thing you know, they've discovered a whole cave system and a subterranean river. Would you look at that?" Rupert was looking. He stood perfectly still, staring into the unblinking darkness. Suddenly, The ground beneath his feet felt like nothing more than a thin crust, and the blue sky and birdsong of the surface world faded as though only an illusion. John and the coordinator continued to talk about the futility of the search, about heading back downhill, but it was a dull murmur under the rush of subterranean water in Rupert's ears. The maw of the swallow hole seemed to sigh, and as it did, Rupert knew that its breath smelled of the musty, rank odour that had pervaded his jeep and his lungs 2 days ago. Rupert knew exactly where the old man was.